Hello. It was a comment made by somebody who came into my Meditation Monday stream on Twitch last week that has prompted this topic for this week's YouTube video. And it's the topic of change and how change, however much you may want the change, and more especially when the change is imposed from outside you, can be difficult to cope with. Now, everybody watching this has lived through a change, very big change imposed from outside, and that happened when we became to realise the reality of what COVID was about. And suddenly we were all living in lockdown, we were all using hand sanitizer, we were wearing masks, even in countries that had not normally worn masks. And to say life changed is putting it mildly. That was imposed from outside. The particular change that prompted the discussion that's prompted this video is probably fairly obviously the death of Queen Elizabeth, which has caused a huge change within the UK. But even changes that we want cause problems. You ask anyone who has moved house, they've spent ages finding and buying their dream house, and then they're moving in, or anybody who has planned a wedding, or anybody who has gone away to university, they go doing the course that they really want to do, they've got into the university that they really wanted, and the change still causes problems. And it causes problems for all sorts of people. I have a friend right now who is suffering from empty nest syndrome because her daughter has gone to university. I went through the same thing when my son went to university, even though he only moved 5 miles down the road. Change is disruptive. But do you know what? The funny thing is that actually the only thing that we can guarantee is going to happen is that change is inevitable. Excuse me, I need to let my cat out. Sorry about that. So, it is one of the major tenets of mindfulness that you need to approach every situation with an open and curious mind. It's sometimes called the mind of a child. And when you approach things with that kind of childlike approach, you see the excitement. You can see the wonder. You can see the possibilities. Because any parent knows that children, when they play, they have no sense of danger when they're very young. They see the dancing flame of a candle and they go, "Ooh, shiny, I want to see what that's all about." They don't think that it might hurt them. The parent does. Very big time the parent does. Now, mindfulness is based on the teachings of the Buddha. Very much based on his teachings. There's also an element of Taoism in there, but that's a different matter. But the one thing that the Buddha taught and realised early on in his life is that nothing in life is permanent. In fact, the only thing that is permanent in life is change. So when change happens, we can have two reactions to it. We can either say, oh, I don't want this change. Or we can just accept that change is an inevitable part of life. Whether it's imposed from inside or whether it's imposed from outside. Now, if that all sounds rather negative and a little bit nihilist, it's not. Because just as we know that holidays don't last forever and parties don't last forever, and sadly, no one lives forever. The other side of that is that the bad things also don't last. The pandemic is almost over. We are getting back to some sort of semblance of normality now. When somebody dies, you go through a period of mourning and grieving, whether it's a person or a pet. But then you develop a new life. Now, the approach to the new different life after a change can be looked at and thought about in two very different ways. If you are so attached to the old life that you can't actually see anything good in the new life, well, guess what? The new life, whether it's without someone that you very much love, whether it's without a relationship that meant the world to you, whether it's without a pet that you lost under tragic circumstances, or whether it's the fact that, you know, the job you loved you got fired from through no fault of your own. If all you can see is what you've lost, going forward, life is going to be very stressful because you get more of what you focus on. If all you can focus on is the loss, the grief, the fact that the new life is different to the old life because that one thing, that one relationship is missing, then yes, it's not going to be good. But if you can approach the new life with an attitude of different doesn't necessarily mean worse, and you recognise that there can still be good things in life without that person there, with a new job, with the recognition that, do you know what, maybe sometimes when life closes a door, a window opens elsewhere. You can approach the change in a much more positive manner. Now, the Buddha looked at this very simply. He said, the root of all suffering is attachment. And he didn't mean attachment to things, you know, like your car, like your money, or anything like that. On a very simple level, what he was saying is, if you become so attached to any part of your life that when that bit inevitably ends, you can't see a way forward, then the new life is not going to be very good because you're constantly looking back to mourn what you have lost. And when you recognize that nothing in life is permanent, it actually leads to a deeper appreciation of the things you have now, coupled with the recognition that, do you know what? I know this isn't going to last forever. This recognition that nothing is permanent except change means that you can deeply appreciate when things are good. When things aren't so good, you can recognize that, you know what? This won't last forever. I mean, talking about the loss of a person or any form of grieving, they talk about the 7 stages of grief, and we all go through them because your emotions change over time. Everything changes over time. And the way to cope with an apparently devastating, all-encompassing change is to recognise that it's just one of many changes that you will have gone through. Because when you look back at your life, you will see that you went through many, many changes. Some you wanted, some you didn't. But you know what? You survived. We've all survived changes. Change isn't something to be feared. Change is something to be not endured, but to just go through step by step. I often in my meditations use the words one breath, one moment at a time. And when I've interacted with people on social media who are obviously going through a rather traumatic change, my most common comment is, look, just cope with things one day at a time. Because you see, in the end, the only time that you have is right now. The past is gone. The future isn't here. And learning to appreciate what you have right here, right now, is the key to coping with difficult changes. Because you always have something right here, right now, that is good, that is enjoyable. It may only be a small thing. Many years ago, I got a telephone call from, I call him a friend. I never met him. He was a fellow pharmacist that I'd met on social media, and it was fairly obvious we had similar kind of views. And most of the pharmacists on the forum knew that I was moving into, things like hypnotherapy, life coaching. And I was on my way to a hypnotherapy training session down in London. I remember I was in the taxi when the phone rang, and it was Mile. I said, "Oh, hello, Mile. What, this is unexpected. What can I do for you?" And the story he recounted, he was obviously devastated. And one of his children had just been diagnosed with motor neurone disease. She was a relatively young woman. She'd got young children. And he said, "I don't know how to cope." Now, to this day, I can't remember what I said to him. I probably threw out a whole load of things in the same way as I use a whole load of different techniques in these videos, because if something doesn't resonate with, one thing is likely to resonate with everybody. And evidently I said one thing that did resonate, because I rang him a few weeks later to say, "How are you doing, friend?" And he said, well, do you know what? I remembered what you said. And I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. What did I say? And he said, when we go to bed, my wife and I, we think back and we find one thing in the day that we can say, that was good. We can be grateful for that. Now, gratitude is also one of the attitudes of mindfulness. And there is a lot of work that's gone on to show that having an attitude of gratitude, focusing on gratitude, does lead to huge improvements in people's mental well-being and actually in their physical well-being as well, because physical and mental go together. You know that. You've watched enough of these videos to know. So if you can cultivate an attitude of gratitude for what is good right here, right now, even if there is devastating change going on around you that you don't want, that makes it easier to cope because the picture isn't all black. You've found one bit of white. And if you've ever seen the yin-yang symbol on my Tai Chi shirts, you will know that the yin-yang symbol is a black splodge with a white bit in the middle and a white splodge with a black bit in the middle, forming a perfect circle. And what that shows is that life is always a mixture of the black and the white, the yin and the yang, the good and the bad. But there is always a little bit of good mixed in with the bad, and always a bit of bad mixed in with the good. And learning to recognize that balance is the key to change, because change can be disorientating. But when you live in the moment, when you learn to look for what is good, when you learn to recognize that life is always a balance of the good and the bad, it helps it easier to keep your equanimity when suddenly something happens to completely unbalance you, as has happened in this country with a lot of people with the Queen's death, as any pet owner knows when a beloved pet dies, as anyone who has ever had a cancer diagnosis knows, when you get the diagnosis and you think, oh my God, what's going to happen now? Or indeed any diagnosis of any serious illness. Things like that will happen. And when you accept that things like that will happen, it helps you to keep your balance, because when it happens, you're not saying, oh, why is this happening? This is so horrible. You're saying, okay, didn't want this, but hey, that's life. And sometimes that's all you can say. Now, I'm recording this on the morning of Monday the 19th, which obviously is the day of the funeral. And anyone who has lost someone close to them will know that the day of the funeral is bittersweet. You've been dreading it. It's going to be the longest day of your life. But at the end of the longest day comes the new dawn and the new life. And always, always, what you make of the new life after a big change is in your hands. You can choose to just focus on what you've lost. Or you can choose to focus on what you've got, what is good, what you can still work with. Yes, it's a different life, but different doesn't mean worse. And very often, a major change is actually the springboard to getting to something much better. When you're in the middle of the change, you won't believe it. And that's when just coping with everything, one breath, one moment at a time, comes in really useful. Because actually, you don't really want to look too far ahead. You just want to focus on what you've got to do right here, right now. So, change is inevitable. Some changes may be big. Some changes may be absolutely huge. Some may be very tiny. But there is always change. Sometimes it's a change that you want. Sometimes it's something that you really don't want, that in many cases, it can be an absolute worst nightmare. But there is nothing you can do to prevent change happening. And desperately trying to cling on to your old idea of life, what life should be like, when it is inevitably changing, simply exhausts you. It takes away energy that you could be using to try and build a new life for yourself. Not the same life, inevitably not the same life, a different life. But different doesn't mean worse. Because in the end, none of us know what tomorrow holds. You think life is fixed, you think you've got a good life and that everything's sorted. But nobody knows what's going to happen in the next breath. If you live in the UK, you will be very aware of the story of Olivia, who at the age of 9 was shot by accident by criminals. A criminal rushed into their house to run away from the person who was trying to chase him and shoot him. And Olivia's mother got shot, and Olivia was shot and killed. Now, that's not something anybody could ever have predicted. It's most certainly not anything Olivia and her family wanted. And they are going to have to build a very, very new life. But that doesn't mean new life isn't possible, a new, very meaningful life, just because the change was unexpected. So if you're watching this because the title, Coping with Change, caught your eye, I hope I've said something that's enabled you to cope with your change, big or small. If you would like to interact more directly with me, then my contact details are in the details of the channel. Do please feel free to contact me, because I have been there. I have been through devastating changes imposed from outside that I most certainly didn't want, but I've survived. And you know what? If things are rough, I just want to remind you of one thing. So far, your ability to survive things is 100%. You have got through 100% of all the bad things that have happened to you. How do I know that? Because you're watching this. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you found this helpful. And one of the keys to change is loving yourself, because very often we get this feeling that we could have done something different to stop something happening. That is very, very rarely the case. So, love yourself. Even if you made a mistake and allowed something to happen, love yourself, because you're human. Human beings make mistakes. We make big mistakes, we make small mistakes, learn from them. And just enjoy each moment as it is, right here, right now. Namaste.